Every business book you read, every motivational speech you hear, every success story you study has one thing in common. They're all written by survivors. And survivors don't tell you about the thousands who did exactly what they did and failed. Think about this carefully. When you study successful people, you're studying a filtered sample. You're looking at people who took risks and won. But you're not seeing the people who took the same risks and lost everything. This is called survivorship bias. And it completely distorts how we understand success. Here's what I mean. Warren Buffett is considered the greatest investor of all time. Everyone studies his methods. Value investing, long-term thinking, patience. And people say, if I invest like Buffett, I'll become rich like Buffett. But here's what they don't tell you. For every Warren Buffett, there are thousands of investors who used the exact same strategy and went bankrupt. They bought undervalued stocks. They held long-term. They were patient. And they lost everything. But we don't write books about them. We don't study their methods. We don't even know their names. So when you read about successful investors, you're only reading about the ones who survived, the ones who got lucky. Same strategy, different outcome. The difference? Timing, market conditions, luck. Let me show you how this works systematically. Imagine you have 10,000 people. Each person flips a coin 10 times. If they get heads, they win. If they get tails, they're eliminated. After the first flip, 5,000 people remain. After the second flip, 2,500 remain. After the third flip, 150 remain. After 10 flips, you have about 10 people left. 10 people who got heads 10 times in a row. Now, here's what happens next. We interview those 10 people. We write books about them. We ask them, what's your secret? How did you do it? And they'll tell you. They'll explain their mindset, their strategy, their morning routine. They'll say things like, I visualized success. I stayed focused. I believed in myself. And it all sounds convincing because they genuinely believe these things contributed to their success. But the truth is simpler and more uncomfortable. They flipped heads 10 times. That's it. Pure chance. The other 9,190 people did the same things, had the same mindset, visualized success, believed in themselves. They just flipped tails. But we only study the 10 survivors. And we conclude that their methods work. This is survivorship bias, and it's everywhere. Let's talk about the self-made billionaire myth. People love this story. Someone starts with nothing, works incredibly hard, takes risks, and becomes a billionaire. It's inspiring. It proves that anyone can make it. But let's examine this more carefully. Elon Musk. Everyone calls him self-made. They say he's a genius who built Tesla and SpaceX from nothing. But did he start from nothing? Elon Musk's family owned an emerald mine in South Africa. He attended elite private schools. When he started his first company, he had access to family money. He could afford to take risks because failure wouldn't destroy him. That's not nothing. That's significant structural advantage. Bill Gates dropped out of Harvard to start Microsoft in his garage. Self-made genius, right? But look closer. He got into Harvard, which means elite private school before that. His family was upper middle class. His mother sat on the board of directors with IBM executives, which is how Microsoft got its first major contract. And when he dropped out of Harvard, he could always go back. He had a safety net. The garage wasn't in a poor neighborhood. Mark Zuckerberg, another dropout billionaire, started Facebook in his dorm room. But he was in a Harvard dorm room, surrounded by other privileged, well-connected students who became his first users and employees. He had access to venture capital networks through Harvard connections. Look at any self-made billionaire and you'll find the same pattern. Family money, elite education, social connections, safety nets. They all started with significant advantages, but we don't want to see this. We want to believe they succeeded purely through genius and hard work. Why? Because if we admit they had advantages, we have to admit the system isn't fair, that their wealth isn't purely earned, that maybe, just maybe, they got lucky. And that's uncomfortable. This creates a massive problem with how we learn about success. All financial advice comes from people who succeeded financially. All business advice comes from people whose businesses survived. All investment advice comes from people who made money. These people genuinely believe they know the formula for success. They write books, give speeches, teach courses, and their advice sounds good because they're living proof it works for them. But here's the issue. They survived, which means they're the statistical outliers, the lucky ones. And outliers make terrible role models because their path isn't replicable. Let me give you a concrete example. In the 1990s, thousands of people quit stable jobs to start internet companies. They maxed out credit cards, mortgaged their houses, worked 100-hour weeks. A tiny fraction of them became millionaires. Most of them went bankrupt. But who do we study? Who writes the books? The millionaires. And they say, see, I quit my job, I took a risk, I worked hard, and I made it. You can too. But that advice is dangerous. Because for every person who quit their job and became a millionaire, there are hundreds who quit their job and lost everything. The millionaires aren't wrong about what they did. They really did work hard and take risks. They're wrong about why it worked. It worked because they got lucky. Right place, right time, right connections, right market conditions. The people who failed did the same things. They just weren't lucky. Let's look at another example, immigration. People often point to successful immigrants as proof that the American dream works. Look, they came here with nothing and built wealth. Anyone can do it. But this completely misunderstands immigration. When someone immigrates to America, they're already selected for success. They're the ones who had the courage to leave everything behind. The ones who were smart enough and lucky enough to get a visa. The ones who had resources to make the journey. In other words, immigrants are pre-filtered for the exact traits that correlate with success, ambition, risk tolerance, resourcefulness, intelligence. So when an immigrant succeeds, we're not seeing proof that the system is fair. We're seeing proof that highly selected people can succeed. But what about all the people who tried to immigrate and couldn't get visas? What about the people who died trying to cross the border? What about the thousands who immigrated and failed? We don't see them. We don't count them. We only count the survivors. And we say, see, the system works. But it's survivorship bias. We're studying the winners and ignoring all the losers who tried the same thing. Here's the uncomfortable truth about success. Luck matters more than we want to admit. Not just a little. Not as a tiebreaker between equally qualified people. Luck is often the primary factor. Where you're born determines your life outcome more than how smart you are or how hard you work. If you're born in the United States versus Somalia, your lifetime earnings differ by a factor of 20 or more. Not because Americans work 20 times harder, but because they were born lucky. If you're born to rich parents versus poor parents, your chances of becoming wealthy differ by a factor of 10 or more. Not because rich kids are 10 times more talented, but because they were born lucky. If you start a business in 2009 versus 2007, your chances of success differ dramatically. Not because 2009 entrepreneurs were smarter, but because they got lucky with timing. Successful people don't want to admit this, because if success is mostly luck, then they're not special. They didn't earn everything. They just got fortunate. And the rest of us don't want to admit this either, because if success is mostly luck, then we have no control. No amount of hard work guarantees results. So we tell ourselves a story where hard work and talent determine success, where anyone can make it if they try hard enough. It's a comforting story, but it's not true. Now, successful people will argue, it's not just luck. I positioned myself strategically. I put myself in places where luck could find me. And there's some truth to this. You can increase your odds. You can make strategic choices that improve your chances of getting lucky. But here's what they don't tell you. Thousands of other people made the same strategic choices. Moved to Silicon Valley, networked aggressively, worked on cutting-edge technology. Most of them didn't become billionaires. They became well-paid employees, or they failed completely. The ones who became billionaires got lucky on top of making good choices. And the ones who got lucky convinced themselves, and everyone else, that it was strategy, not luck. But if it was purely strategy, then everyone who used that strategy would succeed. And they don't. The success rate is still tiny, which means luck is still the dominant factor. So why does this myth persist? Why do we keep believing in self-made success when the evidence points to luck? Because the myth serves a purpose. For successful people, the myth protects their ego. If they earned everything through merit, they deserve everything they have. If they just got lucky, their wealth is less legitimate. So they tell themselves and others that they're self-made, that anyone could do what they did. For unsuccessful people, the myth provides hope. If success comes from hard work and smart decisions, then they still have a chance. They can still make it if they try hard enough. If success is mostly luck, then they're powerless, and that's terrifying. So both groups buy into the myth, the successful to justify their position, the unsuccessful to maintain hope. And the system stays stable. The hierarchy reproduces itself. The lucky stay lucky. The unlucky keep trying. And everyone believes the game is fair. Success is not a formula. It's a lottery ticket that looks like a blueprint. And the people who won tell you what they did. And it sounds like strategy, but what they can't tell you is how many others did the exact same things and lost. Because they don't know those people. Nobody does. We only study survivors. And survivors always have an explanation for why they survived. But explanations aren't the same as causes. The world is more random than successful people want to admit, and less fair than anyone wants to believe. That's not a reason to give up, but it is a reason to stop treating lucky survivors like prophets. They're not. They're just people who flipped heads 10 times in a row and convinced themselves it was skill.